Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Assertion 10 Hub Launch event. We will be starting promptly at 12. We're just waiting for the rest of the delegates to join. If we could have the housekeeping slide, please, Courtney. Thank you. There's just a few housekeeping rules there if you want to have a look at those while we're waiting for the last few people to join, and then we will get started at midday. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Hopefully, everybody can hear me now. I've just seen a couple of notes in the chat to say that they couldn't hear anything. That's because everybody's muted. Just want to say welcome again to the Assertion 10 Made Simple. It's a pleasure for me to be chairing today. My name's Claire Reid. I work at NAUC and I am the project manager for Proper Practices. There's a couple of housekeeping rules there on the screen. We will be recording the event today and it will be available to attendees and on the NAUC website after the event. It is a webinar, so you're not able to speak, but if you could please add any queries that you have into the chat, and my NAUC colleagues will do their best to assist you with those. If you have a question that you would like to raise with any of the panelists, if you could please pop that in the Q&A function. We will have a Q&A session towards the end of our event today, and we'll get through as many as we can. After the event, obviously, we probably won't get through all of the questions. So what we'll do is post-event is send out in the post-event mailing a list of frequently asked questions and responses. Like I said, the chat function's there if you need any support, technical support, or if you want to connect with other people on the chat. And I'll also post some useful links such as that to the hub as we go along. The closed caption function is available. If anybody needs that, please do pop in the chat and we can give you instructions to use that. As I say, there will be a mailing after the event. You will receive the slides. You'll also receive a feedback form. We'd be really grateful if you could complete that for us, and this list of frequently asked questions. Courtney, may we have the next slide, please? So we're here today to talk about Assertion 10. Assertion 10 is all about digital and data compliance, and it is on section 1 of the AGAR, which is the annual governance statement. And the wording is there for you. It's not actually in the practitioner's guide at the moment, but the wording will be on the AGAR form in April. And it says, we have put in place arrangements for the effective IT and data management in accordance with proper practices during the year under review. I've put a little don't panic button there. These are not new requirements, so please do not panic. Assertion 10 brings items that were currently covered under Assertion 3 into the spotlight. And there are 5 key areas which are listed there. So that is email management. We're talking there about domains in particular, website accessibility, freedom of information and transparency codes, data protection, and proper use of IT equipment. Could we please move on, Courtney? Thank you. NALC have released a new Assertion 10 hub, and that's why we're here today, really, to talk about resources that are available to assist you with this new assertion and showing compliance with the new assertion. We've got a new data protection roadmap, and this is a step-by-step guide to getting it right. There's a new model IT policy to strengthen your council's digital governance. Those of you that have looked at the practitioner's guide will note that there is a link within the practitioner's guide to a very basic IT policy. What NALC have done is commissioned a more robust policy, which covers a lot more areas, such as use of own devices. And we also have coming very, very soon a new website accessibility guide to help you reach all of your residents. In addition to those new items, we also have existing guidance on town and parish council email addresses, what to do to move over to a gov.uk domain, which has been updated, and also advice notes on freedom of information and transparency. I'm really delighted that we are joined by 3 panellists today. We've got Mark Tompkins from Aubergine, Dan Purchase, and Darren Briddock from Breakthrough Communications. If you're ready, Mark, I was going to hand over to Mark, who's going to talk to us today about website accessibility and domains and email management. Thank you, Mark.
Claire, thank you so much. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk around the technical sides, so the web and the email and those sorts of things that form part of Assertion 10, as Claire has already mentioned. Anything related to data, UK GDPR compliance, and that's going to be covered by Dan and Darren in the next session. So let's get stuck in. The whole idea about these parts in Assertion 10 is to strengthen the digital and data compliance and governance. So what am I going to talk about? Or rather, sorry, digital compliance and focus. Why are we doing this? Well, professionalism, security, and accessibility, these all form important parts of the overall digital position of councils, whether you are a small parish council or a large town council. In fact, a lot of these practices aren't just limited to parish and town councils. The key requirements, this is the main thing: council-owned domain names, official emails, accessible websites, and continued compliance with UK GDPR, and the introduction of IT policies. Why are we doing this? We're doing this to help mitigate risk, enhance transparency, which of course makes a smoother, better process for everybody, and also, dare I say it, avoids any legal challenges and difficulties later on. So let's get stuck in. In SAP 2025 Practitioner's Guide, Assertion 10 says that by AGAR next year, there are some things that we are going to, all as parish and town councils, going to have to comply with. As Claire has already mentioned, some of them are new, some of them are existing. So this is reinforcing it all, it's bringing it all together. The key aspects are email, website accessibility, IT policies, and compliance with data. So let's start with the email sides of things. This is probably an aspect that has created some of the most broad conversations because of the broadness of how it's been used historically. The requirement is for parish and town councils to stop using free email services such as Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo. And that you must, as a minimum, the clerk must have council-owned domain-based email. So, for example, clerk@abcparishcouncil.gov.uk or clerk@abcparishcouncil.org.uk. What would be a failure, what would be a problem, is abcparishcouncil@gmail.com. There are risks. There are risks for using those free email services. You don't own the domain name. For example, Gmail, owned by Google. You don't own Hotmail, that's owned by Microsoft. You need to own the domain name because otherwise you don't fully control the data within it. And of course, there are risks when it comes to using personal free email services from a freedom of information or subject access request exposure, loss of data, and essentially compromising the official communications and authenticity of your messaging. Now, that relates specifically to the council officer, the clerk. So clerk@abcparishcouncil.gov.uk or .org.uk. We'll talk about domain names specifically in a minute. But what about councillors, members? What about staff? Well, it is best practice for everybody within the council, whether that's the clerk, staff, members, to all use email that works on the domain name. So best practice looks like Councillor Bob Smith at abcparishcouncil.gov.uk. But what is acceptable at the moment is if Councillor Bob, he's our example here, he had Councillor Bob Smith at gmail.com. The key thing is he's using that email address just for his council communications, not his personal email address, because that then creates risks when it comes to, as I've mentioned before, freedom of information and subject access requests. Staff, really, if you are a council with staff, you should all be using the domain name as well. Why? Because if you don't use a domain name that's owned by the council, you have effectively lost control. And therefore you have lost control of the data, the communication, and its security. Now, it also improves compliance in terms of things like auditability, data recover, when things go wrong. If you own the domain name as a council, you will always be able to prove that you are the official body and get access back again. If, however, you continue to use a free email service like Gmail or Hotmail, you cannot prove that you own it. You don't own it. Gmail does. Google, Hotmail does. Also, it adds to the professionalism and the credibility. Owning the domain name demonstrates that people will trust communication from that domain name more so than a free email service. Anybody right now could go on to one of those services, Gmail, Hotmail, and register an email address for free. Let's call it markparishcouncil@gmail.com. And you could, unfortunately, email many hundreds of people within your village or your town, and I suspect that there will be vulnerable people in that community who may fall victim to the scam that it might be being used for. By having a council-owned domain name, there is accountability there. Now, what best practice looks like is having a .gov.uk domain. Many organisations are giving them away free at the moment, and supporting that, having low-cost email packages that support that, means that you can step into this by having what is effectively gold standard email, such and such a parish council, abcparishcouncil.gov.uk. It strengthens the overall governance because council-owned domain names bolster that digital infrastructure and, of course, improves transparency. So best practice is .gov.uk domain. Now, many thousands of parish and town councils over the last year to 18 months, with the support of the Government Digital Service, have applied for their .gov.uk domain. Now, this obviously brings authenticity of message, an elevated level of security and trust, because the organisations that are authorised to register and manage .gov.uk domains have undergone a much greater level of security checking. Now, there are alternate domain names out there, .org.uk, .org.com. These are acceptable as long as the council owns them and they aren't registered in the name of an individual. You would be surprised, or perhaps not, that there are many occasions where domain names are registered in the name of the web developer or the previous 3 web developers that have since disappeared, and the domain is still in their name. So making sure that the domain is in the council's name. A .gov.uk domain name, will always be associated with the council only and not individuals. Now, domain names need to be registered. We're in precept planning season right now, so let's make sure that on the agenda, on the budget planning, if you've not done it already, make sure that you put a nominal amount in for meeting this aspect of compliance. It's not going to be a great deal of money. As I've mentioned, .gov.uk domains at the moment are being given away free or very low cost, and email packages that support that also very low cost. But by doing this, the consistency in domain use is something to keep a track on, making sure that when you have a .gov.uk domain for your email and your website, nobody slips into bad habits and starts using Gmail and Hotmail as well. So that is domain names. Website accessibility compliance is not a new thing. Regulations came in 2018 for compliance by 2020. At that time, it was WCAG, WCAG 2.1 AA. That was the standard. They rose in October last year to 2.2 AA. This means that you must have an accessible and compliant website, and the information that you upload to it also meets the accessibility regulations. There are a number of exclusions, third-party provided content or something that's older than 2018, and a few nominal documents that are excluded from accessibility compliance, but fundamentally everything that you publish needs to be there. You also must have an up-to-date accessibility statement. It is important that the accessibility statement is an accurate reflection of the accessible nature of your website and its content. It should be, like all other policies, reviewed annually for its accuracy. We very often see accessibility statements that are dated 2018, 2019, and as we are in 2026, and almost certainly the web pages have been updated a lot since 2018, 2019, those accessibility statements should have an annual review. Now, this is not just a legal requirement to meet the website accessibility compliance, it's also a moral responsibility. Something like 1 in 5, 20% of every member of the community has a difficulty or a situation in accessing information on a website if it's not made in an accessible way. So that's 20% of your community who could be struggling if it's not accessible. So not just is it the legal requirement, but it's a moral requirement. But here's a thought. It also improves community engagement because you are then making sure that you reach another 20% of your community by making sure that everything that you publish is accessible. What are the consequences of non-compliance? This is a regular point that gets raised, usually by counsellors, I might add, not clerking professionals. Why should we spend X amount of money on a compliant website? Well, obviously there are legal challenges. Members of the public have an absolute and legal right to challenge the council if they are not meeting their accessibility regulations and for not publishing content in an accessible way. So that is a potential. Auditor queries, obviously this is going to form part of the AGAR. And of course reputational damage. All of these reasons and the fact that it is the right thing to do mean that making sure that your website and what you publish on it is accessible. Now here's a few tips. I'm going to go through a few tips. Upload accessible content, making sure your documents are accessible before you upload them. They will not magically become accessible once you've uploaded them. There are lots of trainers and organizations out there that can provide you with guidance on creating accessible documents. Use an accessibility checking tool. Now there are a large number of these, but if you get into the habit of using a checking tool after each time you've made an update to your website, you're going to learn what's right and what's not, but also you can move forward knowing that you are ensuring that regular checking is being taken place. Free browser checking tools, Wave by WebAIM, Lighthouse by Google, Axe by DQ. Lots of these free services will appear in your browser. You can add it to your browser and you can check web pages as you go. Now, if the outcome of those checking processes result in something a bit too technical, take it to your website provider so that they can interpret it for you. Now, one of the other aspects of making sure that your website is accessible is try and avoid accessibility overlays or pop-ups, plugins, because they actually create greater barriers than they solve. They do not create an equal experience for all users. This is not just my opinion, this is also the opinion of Scope, one of the biggest charities in the UK that represent people with disabilities. They wrote a fantastic article on how accessibility overlays that appear on a website to provide tools create big barriers for people with disabilities. So try and look at it from a point of view, is there a better way to make my content and website accessible? Conducting a periodic audit. Now, all of these things you might feel are adding to the weight, adding to your day-to-day tasks as clerks. But these are not new things. These have always been here. These have been here since 2018. So you should be used to knowing what's accessible and what's not. But it does help performing a periodic audit, whether that's once a year or every 6 months, using those free tools, so there's no cost there, just to help identify those compliance gaps and also improve the experience of your users who might have disabilities. You can use software, and also nothing beats a manual check through the website. On my screen are a range of tips, day-to-day publishing techniques that you can take away. We're going to be sharing the slides. Here's a few that I'd like you to consider. Some of these you can have a really, really positive and large-scale impact when you're updating your website. One of them is making sure that you use descriptive link text. So don't use click here. Don't use download or read more. Describe where the link is going to go or what it's going to open. So if you are going to link to the December 2025 Parish Council minutes, make that the link text. This makes a much better experience. It's a huge improvement. And also, when you are adding links to web pages, please avoid placing the entire HTTPS URL onto the web page, because most screen readers will audibly read those web addresses slowly, one letter at a time. So the more of those URLs you've placed on the page, the worse the experience. Now, there are a number of other publishing techniques, like adding structure to your web page using sequential headings, H1, H2, H3. This technique hugely improves not just the website experience, but also you can translate that using it in your Word documents as well. I'm not going to go into every single one of these techniques now, but they will be on the slide deck afterwards for you to try. So let's move on a little bit now. I want to talk about IT policy. This is new. This is a new aspect. What is its purpose? Well, let's call it a set of guidelines. Let's call it a set of rules. As a sector, the technical knowledge and experience isn't a huge amount. So by creating an IT policy, a set of rules, this is how we as a parish or a town council will operate with our software and our hardware and our data. By setting these rules, it means that you can create continuity of service as staff and members come and go over time. But also it's providing you with those guidelines as to what to do if and when things go wrong. If a councillor leaves, what do you do with the data? If an email address or the email system gets hacked, if the accounting software breaks or you get locked out, having processes in place for people to look back to follow when things go wrong means that you don't get people making snap decisions as to what to do there and then. It's a plan. Having that plan means that you have already started to think about your potential risks. Now, obviously, there's a large aspect of this that relates around data and UK GDPR compliance, which Dan and Darren are going to go into. But inside an IT policy, the whole purpose of it is to enhance your digital resilience, make you more robust, because if you know what you've got to do when things go wrong, or you know what the process is to follow when it relates to software or hardware, it means that the outcome will be better. So what makes a good IT policy? Well, first of all, you would need to set out the scope and the purpose. So who does it relate to? What is the purpose of it? The objectives of the document. Set the boundaries. Does it relate to all staff, all members, all volunteers? Who does it relate to? So set the scope and set the purpose. It needs to cover things like data management that need to align with your data practices. Also, cybersecurity processes and best practice, email and system password management. What to do if something goes wrong, for example, a phishing attack, when a councillor or a member of staff receive an email from somebody that purports to be an officer or somebody like that, and accidentally clicks a link and exposes the council to a digital problem. What to do in those cases. Also, what to do in terms of cyber protection. Councillors, staff devices will have a minimum level of protection, antivirus, for example, on their devices. Now, reviewing this and making sure that training is part of the IT policy is a really important thing. It's all very well coming up with this great big long list of the councillors and the staff will and won't do this, but making sure that people are aware how to do the things that they have to do is an important aspect. So in your policy, make sure that training and the review period is also defined. Because Operationally, as a council, you will change as the year passes. So each year, again, just like every other policy, it's worth reviewing it to making sure that it is still both relevant and up to date. Now, as Claire said at the beginning of the session, there is an up-to-date IT policy that's going to soon be available in the hub. But here's some tips in terms of the things that you add to make it specific to your parish and your town council. Use simple language. Use clear, non-technical, effective language, verbose language that everybody can understand, because not everybody will have a technical background or an understanding. Another aspect is avoid unrealistic rules. I have seen IT policies that says councillors and all staff will run a weekly antivirus and malware scan on all devices. Realistically, that isn't going to happen. It might be that you have a larger council that has an IT department that is able to action something like that systematically. If that is the case, great. But generally speaking, try and avoid unrealistic rules in your IT policy. Start with something that is achievable, and over time you can always add to them. Now, the other aspect is link to other relevant documents. Don't duplicate the content, because if you duplicate the content, you'll then have version control. So if in your IT policy you discuss data retention, link to your separate data retention policy. If in your IT policy you talk about website accessibility compliance, link to your accessibility statement, but don't copy the content from those and bake it into the IT policy. Link to them. And as I've mentioned before, also have a sort of an onboarding, offboarding process, so that when new members of staff join, when new council members or councillors join, there's an onboarding process so that everybody understands what those rules are and the guidelines. So here's my closing action plan. This is your takeaway. Secure a domain name for your council that you can use the email and also point your website at it. So for example, abcparishcouncil.gov.uk would be the web address, and clark@abcparishcouncil.gov.uk for the email address. Remind councillors and members not to be using their personal email addresses for their communications, and if as an organisation you can't quite stretch to giving councillors and members domain-based email, make sure they are using a service, an email service that is their council communications only. Now, in terms of the website accessibility, again, this is something that's it's not new. It's been around a while. But if you are coming to this new, or you're thinking it's time to review the council's position on it, perform an audit. Go through the website, use some of those free tools, Wave by WebAIM, Lighthouse by Google. They're free tools that you can perform an accessibility compliance check on it. If you don't have the technical capability or the bandwidth to do it, consider approaching an organisation that might be able to offer a website accessibility audit. It might be time to also consider updating the website if you are going to look at a domain name and email. And then the last takeaway point in this particular section is create or review your IT policy so that you can adapt to the changes in the tech. Because as you add a new website, as you add new members who might be using their phones for their council emails, as you add new accounting software, all of these things need to be considered when you're crafting your IT policy. So start to think about these things. A very, very good starting point is to sit down with your councillors, maybe create a working group, sit down with your councillors and decide, let's draw up a list of all of the software and the hardware meaning computers, phones, laptops, that sort of thing, and software. Write down a list of all of those things that you've got and think about how they are used, because that's going to form a really good starting point for your IT policy. Now, this is an opportunity. The IT policy is the wraparound of all of the things that we do online as councils. How we talk to people over email in a professional but also authentic way, how we present the information publicly on the website, and how we interact and behave digital and data compliance online. All of these things are wrapped around by that IT policy because it improves professionalism and online behaviour. And it's also going to nurture just general better practices in terms of digital and data. As I have mentioned before, and I know my friends at the Government Digital Service have supported this, it improves the authenticity of message. Because it is in these difficult times of increased online cyber threat and fraud, it is difficult to stand out in all of that noise. So having a council's official domain name for your email and your website means that you can do that in a better way. And fundamentally, all of this ensures full inclusivity for the public information that you publish. It's not adding to your burden. These are all things that we have been doing and have had to be doing for some time now. But all of these are being brought together into one aspect that's going to be on your AGAR next year to say, yes, we've got this in hand, we've done this, because it's a good place to be in. So that brings to an end this particular section in today's session. I'm just going to stop the share. There we go. Claire, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Hopefully this session has been helpful for everybody on today's session. I'll hand things back to you now.
Thank you, Mark. That was very informative, and hopefully people took a lot away from that. There are various questions popping up in the Q&A. If there's a question in there that is similar to the question that you wish to ask, you can upvote the question, and those that are at the top we'll answer first when we come to the Q&A later. So please do remember to pop your questions in the Q&A, and if there's one that's similar to the question you'd like to ask, just upvote it, and then we know what most people want to ask. I'm now going to hand over to Dan Purchase from Breakthrough Communications, who's going to talk to you all about data protection. And I believe Darren is here with us as well. I can't see him at the moment, but he was here earlier. So hopefully he's not disappeared, Dan.
No, he's definitely there. I can see him. That's good.
Okay, brilliant.
Good. Hello, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Nauk. And hello to everybody who is either watching the webinar live or is watching the recording. I'm just going to share my screen and then I will get going. Okay, so we're going to be speaking in this section of the webinar about what does data protection look like in practical, real-world terms for parish and town councils, including in the context of the data protection bit, if you like, of Assertion 10. Just by way of introduction, as Claire said, I'm Dan Purchase. I'm Director at Breakthrough Communications, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Darren Braddock, who is Head of our Information Compliance Services. And I'll let Darren introduce himself properly in a moment. But what I will say is Darren is not only a qualified data protection professional, but spends a significant amount of his working week giving practical advice and support to many of you, to clerks, particularly through the advisory service that we have with Now, which I'll mention later, as well as to our own customers. So not only do we understand data protection, we genuinely understand the often unique challenges that you face. And just by way of introduction, we have two areas of specialism. Half of our work is helping councils with communications and community engagement. The other half of our work is helping councils with information compliance, which we term as being both data protection on one side of the information governance coin, but also information compliance coin, but also freedom of information. And as I mentioned, we operate an advisory service which is run nationally through NALC and run in partnership with the county associations, and we'll talk a bit more about that later on. In other words, if you have a difficult situation or a question, you can get advice. We don't need to suffer in silence. So, Darren, I'm going to hand over to you to talk us through what this looks like in practice.
Thanks very much for that, Dan. If you can just wander the slides forward as we go. So the SAP guide has got within it some requirements that you're going to have to sign up to with the assertion. Now, as Mark said, nothing new here. This has been all been a requirement since 2018 to comply with the GDPR. There are a couple of things that are worth noting. Smaller authorities must follow both the UK General Data Protection Regulation and the Data Protection Act, so it's the data protection laws. Well, this is nothing new. Of course, everybody has to comply with data protection. Data protection is applicable to every bit of data processing, every bit of personal data processing that is done in the UK that is not for purely household or domestic reasons. So the GDPR and the Data Protection Act apply to everyone, regardless of size of authority. 1.52 is interesting in what it says here. It says all smaller authorities, including parish meetings, must process data with care, obviously, and in line with the principles of data protection. Now, I'd just like to home in on that word principles. It doesn't mean that you should do it in the spirit of data protection. Data protection law is principle-based legislation, and Article 5 sets out 7 principles of data protection. 7 ways that personal data must be processed. And that's what that means. It means you must abide by the principles that are baked into data protection law. So it's not just do it like, you know, it's kind of in the way of data protection. It's you must process in line with the principles. So you must have a lawful basis. You must process lawfully and fairly. You must limit the use of your data to the original purpose that you specified when you collected the data. You must minimize the amount of data that you process to what is absolutely necessary and nothing more. You must ensure that the data that you process is accurate. You must only retain personal data in a form that it continues to be identifiable for the amount of time to complete the purpose. Once the purpose is finished, you should get rid of the data. And the 6th principle is that you must be able to process securely, technical and organisational measures to maintain security. The 7th overriding principle is that you should be able to demonstrate your accountability under data protection. So none of that is new. All of that has been there since 2018. And that 1.52 says that everything you do must process in line with those principles of data protection. Now, a couple of things here. Mark said that an IT policy was new. I'm about to disagree with him. It's new in the assertions, but it ain't new. It's a statement, as Mark said, of if we put it into data protection language, it's a statement of technical and organisational measures to maintain the security of your data. The very good IT policy that NALC have produced goes further than the one that SAP have linked to, because it says things like whose equipment can be used with that data, whose email addresses can be used with that data. So again, none of it is new. It's all been in data protection law since 2018. Email is a very interesting one. I think you got from Mark there a very key steer that it is probably best to have an authority-owned email address and give it to everybody. There's nothing in the assertion, as Mark says, that means you can't you have a dedicated email address, for example, for a councillor to use. I would, however, get you under data protection to look at that and say, have I actually got a contract for that email address? Because that email address will be processing personal data on behalf of the council. And you're required to have a contract under Article 28. You're required to have a contract for all of your data processing that's done by external data processors. So I would consider that, and you should risk assess it. 1.53 is a statement that says that you are both a data controller and a data processor. Well, those are data protection terms. There will be certain circumstances where a local council, a parish or town council, is a data processor, but mainly you are a data controller. The buck stops with the council as an entity. It is a data controller. It is responsible for the data processing that it does. Can I have the next slide, please, Dan? The guidance section of SAP talks about some things that you need to do in order to demonstrate how you are asserting and how you are meeting that assertion. There's one tiger that I would like to shoot straight away, and that is appoint a data protection officer to oversee data protection and ensure compliance. Now, I queried this the minute it came out, and it's been amended so that the additional wording of under section 7 of the DPA 2018 parish councils and parish meetings are exempt from that requirement. The reason it says that is because the practitioner's guide is for a wider audience than simply parish, town and parish meeting style councils, but parish, town councils and parish meetings are exempt from the automatic requirement to appoint a data protection officer. There are certain circumstances where a parish council will be processing data to an extent that it should have a data protection officer, and that is something that you must look at for yourselves when you know what you're processing. But the automatic you must have a data protection officer is exempt for parish and town councils and parish meetings. The guidance goes on and says, conduct a regular data audit to identify what personal data is held. Now, we call that in the trade a data map, because data protection works as a bit of a journey. First of all, you've got to discover what you've got and why you've got it. Why are you processing people's data? What different jobs are you doing with that data? Only once you fully understand why you are processing people's data and what different jobs you're doing with it, can you then start to apply the principles. Make sure you're applying the correct lawful basis. Make sure you are minimizing the data. Risk assess what you're doing. Only then, once you've risk assessed it, can you start to mitigate those risks that you find, i.e. start to write policies. So you can't get to that third bullet point there of implement the data protection policy. It's usually a suite of policies, by the way. But you can't even get to that stage until you've discovered what data you've got, you've mapped it, and until you've risk assessed it, because you can't mitigate what you don't know. And then finally, once you've written policy, you can then inform people. You can write your privacy notice. You'll be able to write a privacy notice that actually has sensible, logical, relevant things in it. And then you can adequately train your staff and counsellors, and then you can keep it all under review. Security using technical and organisational measures. Well, that's in Article 32 of the UK GDPR, that you have to have appropriate technical and organisational measures to maintain security. It is also the 6th data protection principle. And as Mark said, That's where the IT policy meshes in to all of this. But again, you can't judge your security compliance with data until you know why you have got that data, what your lawful basis is for processing it, what different jobs you're doing, and you've risk assessed it. So it's a continual journey. Can I have the next slide, please, Dan? So this has been on the books since the 25th of May 2018. But so there's nothing new. But Assertion 10 brings a focus. I think Claire actually said it very well right at the start. She said it brings this into focus. It sort of highlights, puts a spotlight on it. So it actually allows us to sort of focus in on this particular thing. Can we have the next one, please, Dan? It's all about the processing of personal data. Now, personal data is any information at all that can identify somebody either directly or indirectly. So it's much more than just someone's name or someone's email address. It's completely context dependent. And again, that's why you have to look at the data that you have and look at how you process it and why you process it, because then you will see what is and what is not personal data. Does it meet the test of personal data, which is it possible to identify a living, breathing human being from that piece of information? Because if it is possible to identify a living, breathing human being from that piece of information, it is personal data, and all of the data protection laws and principles apply. Goes without saying, every council up and down the land, no matter what size, processes personal data. There is not a council out there that does not process personal data. If you have written a minute of a meeting and at the top of that minute you put a list of people who attended that meeting, you have just processed personal data. Every council processes personal data. There isn't one who doesn't. But there are many, many different reasons why a council will process personal data. We've got some examples on screen, but it's completely not an exhaustive list. In my experience working with town and parish councils over the last 5 years, I have identified that the smallest number of reasons to process personal data, purposes we call them in the trade, is 15. 15 different purposes. That's the smallest I've ever found. And the largest I've found so far was 45 different purposes. And it depends on what services you provide. It depends on what your resourcing is. It depends on the level of staffing, how big, what you do. It's completely unique. And your list of purposes will be unique to your council. That's why you have to discover right at the start of your data protection journey what you process, why you process it. Can we have the next one, please, Dan? It's not just tick box, any of this. You can't. I must admit, I'm going to scream the next time somebody asks me, is there a template I can just copy for all of this? I'm either going to scream or I'm going to cry, one or the other. Because as I've said, it is so bespoke to your council. It's a continual assessment of what you do, why you do it, and where the risks are to people's rights and freedoms, and what you're going to do to mitigate those risks. And it's a continual thing. It's not a level in a computer game where you achieve data protection and then move on to go and do something else. It's a continual thing. Data protection evolves. The data that you process will change. You will start to do new services. You'll do things in new ways. You'll get new ways of doing things. Nothing stands still, and data protection needs to be kept under review. Can we have the next one, please, Dan? So what we've done in order to try and help with some of this is we have built a self-guided journey, and now have put it into the Assertion 10 hub. Please do not use it if you're running a small business. Don't use it to run data protection in your small business, because we designed this journey to be the journey that a local council, a parish, town, parish meeting should go on. It's a 4-stage journey of that discovery phase, that risk assessment phase, the mitigation and policy writing, and finally the informing people what you're doing and keeping under review. We've written it in a way that we hope is accessible and easy to follow. We've written it as a linear journey, because for all of these things, each aspect informs the next. It's very, very tempting to jump into the end and try and get the instant gratification of a suite of policies and a data and a privacy notice, but unless you've actually gone through the process, you won't have the information to put into those policies or into that privacy notice. So it is something that you should approach as a linear journey. It will let you look at the different types of personal data you have and identify what your different purposes are. As I said, my experience, anything between 15 and 45. From then, you can assign lawful basis. Lawful basis is in the GDPR. There are 6 lawful bases for processing data, and everything you do, you need to boil each purpose down to the appropriate lawful basis. You can then risk assess, and then you can write policies and documentation. If you are taking time now, can we have the next bullet, please, Dan, to understand what you're processing, why you're processing. If you do this journey, and you can do this journey as a self-guided journey, or we're here, we can help you, we can guide you through it. Then you're setting yourself up for future success. You're reducing the risks of non-compliance with data protection. Mark used a fantastic word earlier on as well, which was, it's not only law, it's moral obligation. You're processing people's personal data. You're processing the data of living, breathing human beings. And you are a public authority, regardless of size. You have got an obligation to process it in the very highest of standards. Can we go to the next one, please, Dan?
Okay, so just to sorry, go on, Darren, go ahead.
So just to sort of finish that off, what we've done is provide you with an easy to follow roadmap to undertake your own journey, and I just can't overemphasize it is a journey that is yours to take. Dan will now tell you. Well, Dan will summate some of the things I've witted about.
Thanks, Darren. So, as Darren said, a key message we want you to remember from this part of the webinar is there's nothing new under the sun. The data protection obligations that you have as a council are not new, and in its current form, the GDPR that came in 2018, which has subsequently been altered by both the UK GDPR that we now have in a post-Brexit context, along with the Data Use and Access Act amendments earlier on this year. Essentially, the legislation is still very much there. There is still an obligation on councils to be compliant. This is not new. The great thing that Assertion 10 is doing, I think, actually is a positive thing, is giving councils the opportunity to put a spotlight on what they do. I'm not sure there is any council here today on this webinar who is operating in exactly the same way as they did in 2018. For example, no council was using AI tools in 2018. A lot of councils now are. Lots of councils were not operating in the cloud in the way they were. Compared to how they are now, for example. You're also taking on services and assets that you may not have had in 2018. So there's a great opportunity to sense check where you are. And as Darren said, data protection itself isn't binary. It's about It's not a single yes or no tick box. It is a journey. And the way your council operates will be different, is different, as Darren said, to even your nearest neighbour council, actually, when we look at your staffing, your resource, your services, the tools you use, the ways you work, and your policies. And we're delighted to have worked with now to produce the data protection roadmap resource so that you can undergo as a council a self-guided journey. As Darren said, we are also here and can help you too. But for lots of councils that don't necessarily have the financial resource or need external support, this is a fantastic resource that you can access today. And a final point from us before I hand back to Claire is we know how busy you are. No clerk has got spare time on their hands, but time invested now to get this right will absolutely save you headaches and stress later on. Because as we alluded to, we're through the advisory service we run in partnership with NALC and the county associations, along with our own customers, many of whom are here today, I can see, actually, we see what happens when this goes wrong. And so my advice to you is please find time to sense check where you are. Claire, back to you.
Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you, Darren, as well, for that sort of summary of the key points there for everybody. I did pop in the chat earlier the link to the hub, the resource hub on the NALC website. I will pop it in again in a moment, and it will be on the post-event mailing, so you know where to look. So we did say that at the end we would look at some questions in the Q&A. Thank you to Mark, who's been working like an absolute trooper while Darren's been speaking, answering questions in the chat. So there are a number of answered questions in there that you can go back and look at, and there are some here that I'll bring to the fore now. So this is for you, Mark, I would think. It says our website is largely compliant and our accessibility statement highlights what is not. For example, you cannot modify line height or spacing of text. There are some older PDFs, etc. Is this all okay, or has absolutely everything got to be accessible?
That's a really good question, and one that comes up a lot. The checking services to which I referred to earlier on will give you that answer. I can't give you a definitive answer without knowing what your web address is and looking at it. But largely, if the website framework itself meets the accessibility standards that you can check using the Wave by WebAIM tool or similar, then that is fine. Just because some of the content is non-accessible, you can define that in your accessibility statement. But what the accessibility statement is not is a reason for not doing something. It is written in the legislation that the councils must make reasonable adjustments. And so you must, where you can, make the content accessible. So there's two parts of this. Does the website meet the accessibility standards, which you need to check using the software? And the content that you add, you've got to make sure it does if you upload it. Obviously, if it's third-party provided or older content, older than 2018, then it doesn't need to comply.
Thank you, Mark. I think we'll give you a rest, Mark, and I'll ask this question of Dan and Darren. It says, bearing in mind that councillors are volunteers and we can't compel them to take training, only advise and encourage them and make training available, do we need to get all councillors to attend training, or can we produce a suitable document updated as required and get them to sign this to say they have said and received it? I assume they were talking about data protection training, Dan.
I'm going to give you a really data protection answer.
And then I'll give a non-data protection answer to wrap it around. Go on, Darren.
You have to risk assess your own situation. Do you believe, as the outcome of your risk assessment, that you can adequately train people in that way?
That's a really, really good way of thinking about it, actually, in all seriousness. Just on training, because this is an interesting one. Training, as we set out earlier, is not a mandatory part of Assertion 10. It is, the word is should. I don't think it's controversial what I'm about to say. Training is a good thing. I hope that's not a controversial statement to make on this webinar. So, for example, obviously we run data protection training in partnership with county associations in England. There is lots of other training available as well. It doesn't matter where you get the training from. I would argue that wherever you get the training from, It is important, although not mandatory, I grant you, that different people in the council are trained for the right things, the things that councillors need to be aware of as their accountability to the council as the overarching data controller is different to what, say, a clerk or a lead officer needs to know themselves. So getting access to the right training in the right way, I would argue, is a good thing to help achieve compliance. The problem with putting it on a piece of paper is I don't quite know what that would actually achieve in terms of helping people to understand what their obligations are. So, but also I recognise as a training provider ourselves, the challenge of getting some people to attend training. I think actually explaining, it's about mitigating risk. It's about helping all of us, counsellors and officers, understand what we need to do collectively and individually to safeguard our council. Framing it in that way may be a positive thing. Hope that helps, Claire.
Thank you, Dan. Mark, another one for you, I believe. What do you do if councillors are not capable of using the email account that has been set up for them, or creating their own separate email account and continue to use their personal email accounts? And it is caveated there, it says they are in their 80s. Should I not send them anything and take documents to their home?
I think that actually
might be Darren.
That's actually one for me.
Well.
That's one for me.
Apologies, Mark.
You've got to be sure that you are adequately complying with the data protection principles. Now, that means a few things. You've got to have security of processing. Are you in control of all of those email accounts? You've got to comply with people's rights. You've got to be able to comply with the subject access request. Are you able to search that email account? You've got to be able to comply with freedom of information requests. Are you able to search that email account? I think it was 3 years ago, the Deputy Information Commissioner talked about this in an online session for data protection professionals, and it was actually referred to in the local council context. And what the Deputy Information Commissioner said was that you needed to have appropriate technical and organisational measures to maintain a proper record. So the question that I'm sort of throwing back is, if you've got two councillors who are refusing to use the email addresses you've given them for whatever reason, is it appropriate for you to work around that, or should you stop sending them emails to their personal email accounts completely and only use their gov.uk's? And I think you probably should. Because if you've got as far as identifying that you have a risk, which is the usage of email, and you have mitigated that risk by giving council email boxes to councillors, you can't then say, but it doesn't apply to those two.
Also, I think it's worth just noting that an IT policy is a set of guidelines, and there have been quite a number of questions in here this morning that have asked similar questions, and that is, how do we make our councillors use the .gov.uk email addresses that we've given them? Well, that's what the IT policy is there for. If you as a council decide that you will only accept official communications in or out of councillors and council email addresses using official council email address, define it in the policy, give a period of time by which compliance is required, and then enforce it. Because then if you don't write it in your policy, you've got nothing, you've got no rules against which to fall back upon.
Yeah, totally agree.
Thank you both. One for you, Mark. Can you recommend a cloud-based backup to use to back up our 365 OneDrive? In the event that Microsoft were to be hacked, we would like to be sure we could access our files and data. We have had recommended Datto so far, but wondered if you had any other recommendations.
Look, backing up data is a really important thing, but actually there's an element of this that falls into Darren and Dan's part, but I'll talk about the technical sides of things. If you are planning and essentially building in mitigation for Microsoft 365 to be hacked, I, if that's the only driver, I wouldn't bother, because as long as you've got two-factor authentication enabled on your Microsoft 365 account, it's as secure as it's going to be. What's not secure is if you then go and download that to a hard drive and it sits sloshing around in somebody's drawer somewhere that you occasionally, and then you as a clerk leave, and then suddenly you've got a backup drive of all the communications that you shouldn't have. So use the inbuilt Microsoft, if 365 is the service that you're using, use the inbuilt backup service that comes as part of the package. If you have got a lower package, consider taking it out. But essentially having a backup service, you've got to think about, I'm copying this data and I'm moving it over here. Do you want to do it?
Sixth data protection principle, giving you the data protection answer, and it completely backs up what Mark says. Sixth data protection principle, appropriate technical and organisational measures to maintain data security. You've got to make your own judgment about what you do. Probably one of the worst things you could do is copy it all onto one of these nasty things and then lose it.
Yeah.
Thank you both. This is an interesting one. I think probably, well, hopefully a shortish answer. We might get another one in after this. It says, when emails come in via the clerk from members of the public raising questions or concerns which need to be forwarded on to councillors, should the sender's email address, name, etc. be redacted prior to forwarding? In the past, I've assumed the person intends to write to the council as a corporate body, and therefore redaction would not be necessary. But recently, I've wondered if this is correct.
Third data protection principle, data protection minimization. Data minimization. You should only be processing data internally to the extent that it is necessary to undertake the purpose for which you're processing it. Therefore, if the councillors need to know the name of the person, perfectly all right to send it. But if they don't need to know the name of the person, take the names out. Process the minimum you need to process in order to achieve what you need to achieve.
Thank you. I'm just having a quick look through. We've got a really popular question here, actually, and this might be more for me, I'm not sure. It says, if some areas are still a work in progress at the 31st of March, i.e. website compliance, which might need time or money to resolve, would this be marked a no on the AGAR? I don't know if any of the panelists have got any thoughts on that, or whether you'd like me to sort of speak on that.
Certainly in terms of the website compliance, it should have been done in 2018. So, let's be clear. There's been 6 precepts since then to budget for it. It should have been done. But if for whatever reason it hasn't been done, you are going to need to mark it as a no.
And similarly for data protection, are you actually just going to sit there and say you've not been complying with GDPR since 2018?
I think the important thing here to note as well is if something is still in progress, obviously, if you are marking a no, you have to give some sort of explanation as to how that's going to be addressed. So I think it's just making sure that if you do click no, that you're really clear and that your council's clear on your sort of plan of action for the future. So if you have not yet got a suitable email address because there is not currently the funds, then to be able to say it's, the council have discussed this, it's in a meeting, a minute from a public meeting, that we are moving forward with this and there's budget available for the next financial year. So by the time you come around to the next AGAR, it's in place. So I think it's key that those, that it's not just a no and that's that there is a plan in place. Thank you, everyone. We're going to have to sort of draw the questions to a close now. There are still a number of questions that have remained unanswered, and what we will do is we will put those to the panelists here today, and we will send out a list of sort of frequently asked questions, because they do all seem to circle around key themes. So we'll put those out to you via the post-event mailings, and we'll also make them available on the NAUC website. Just popped up on the screen there, just for everyone's information, those of you here today that are members of NALC and your county associations, there are expert advisory services available to you. They're listed there, as you can see. So there's legal advice, finance guidance, HR and health and safety, communications and compliance, which includes data protection. And there's also a vast online resource library. If you go into the NALC website, the new website has a much better search functionality. If you pop in what it is you're looking for, you should find plenty of information. And of course, I think it's getting covered. The link there was to the hub where you will find the resources that have been discussed today. I'm just going to do a shameless plug here. As I said at the beginning, I'm responsible for the Proper Practices review, the Proper Practices project. I would love you all to get involved in the sector-wide consultation that's currently running. It closes on the 2nd of January, so if you're bored over Christmas and you want something to do, please do follow the link from the NALC website and put your views forward. It really is a golden opportunity for you as practitioners to have a say in the future of the proper practices. When I talk about proper practices, those are the sections 1 to 3 of the Practitioner's Guide. Thanks, Courtney. There's also a list there of future events that NALC are running, and you can also search those on the website on the events tab. Very quickly, we've got sort of a couple of minutes. Can we just go round to our panellists, and can we have your key takeaway for today, please? We'll start with Dan, because you're the first person I can see on my screen.
Cheers, Claire. First of all, thank you everyone for coming. Data protection is not new. And time saved now will yield dividends later. You've got a great resource now. Everyone can go and do as a self-guided journey with the data protection roadmap. We're also here at Breakthrough Communications if you need help directly as a council. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Darren, you're next in the line of fire on my screen.
You know how every council's got one of those people who appoints themselves as your self-proclaimed conscience and your self-proclaimed supervisory authority. If you've got a chink in your data protection compliance armour, if there is something for them to scratch at, they will scratch at it. They will start looking into how you are complying with data protection, because it's a really easy technical way that they can make their point and win, and they can say, you should be doing this, but you're not, are you? Don't give them that excuse. Look at your data protection compliance, look at what you need to do, and don't give them this easy technical win that they can have in their own private battle that nobody else knows why they're undertaking with you.
Thank you, Darren. And Mark, you've got a minute. Go.
Thank you. Put simply, get the council's own domain name, specifically for the clerk's email address. Might as well go for gold and have a .gov.uk. We're giving them away for free at the moment. And whilst you're at it, make sure that your website that you would park on that domain name meets the accessibility regulations. Lots of years have passed now, so it's entirely feasible that the website that you originally commissioned back in 2018-19 might have drifted out of compliance. Maybe you are a new clerk in post and it was set up before you arrived. So it's good to look at this as from a holistic view of wrapping it all into your IT policy, your domain name, how you behave online, and your website compliance. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you to all of our panellists who've come along today to talk to us all. Thank you to those of you who've joined, whether that's live today or whether that's joining us to watch the recording. You will get the post-event mailing, and you will also have a feedback form pop up at the end of the session when you leave today. Please do give us your feedback. It really helps us make sure that the events we're delivering meet your needs. And lastly, do go to the NALC website, do have a look on the Assertion 10 hub. All the resources are there to help you. And good luck with the AGAR next year. Thanks, everyone.